All right. Let's finish up our last half hour of material. Well, there's still plenty of other material for us to cover. How many of you have seen your batteries explode? Yeah, not enough of you are raising your hands. Now, batteries catch fire, batteries can explode. It is pretty rare, but it is definitely something that happens. Why do our batteries explode? Yeah, you're just listing a long list of things that can go wrong, which is basically true, right? Anything that can go wrong may cause our batteries to explode, right? You step on it wrong, kaboom. You squeeze it too hard, kaboom, right? Yeah, so that's kind of what happened on this one right here. This is actually fairly recent, sitting unused for quite some time. They charged up all the batteries. They took a look at it and said, okay, let's try flying it. It's been sitting in a closet. They launched it, flew a couple of feet, and then just came tumbling down, complete loss of power. They picked it up. Everything looked fine until they gave the battery a squeeze, and then all of a sudden it caught fire in their hand, tossed it onto the pavement, and there it continued to burn. So battery fires definitely can happen. Now, it's pretty rare, but in fact, it does happen. So what happens here, you can see this in these pictures right here. Swollen batteries are recipes for disaster. The batteries, our LiPo batteries, are filled with an electrolytic gel that acts as the polymer that stores the energy within our battery systems. As we use those batteries, as we overcharge them, undercharge them, overuse them, overheat them, put them in high humidity environments, that gel will degrade. As that gel degrades, we build stronger connections from the anode to the cathode, decreasing the internal resistance of the battery. As that resistance decreases, it short circuits the battery, leading to a exothermic chain reaction, which then releases gas, swells up the battery, and ultimately will cause those batteries to explode, catch fire. Now, they're not typically explosive and fiery. It's more smoky fires, lots and lots of smoke, a little bit of flames. So what happens when you have your battery fires, you really may have two types of fires that you're dealing with. You have the metal fire from the LiPo battery itself, the lithium ions in there. And then you may have a combustible fire, normal ones, caused by the sparking of the other fire. So you may have two fires that you're working with. Now, these kind of LiPo battery fires, with the smaller ones, you could definitely probably put them out with a regular fire extinguisher, a dry powder, chemical dry powder fire extinguisher will definitely put it out. You really need to smother them quite well in order to put out these fires. You could still have a battery fire, LiPo battery fire, continue to rage, however, even if you submerge it underwater. You need to break it down. Smothering it in sand will help bring things down, or a dry chemical fire. Lots of fun times there. Always have a plan of action for what happens or what you should do when your batteries catch fire, either in the field or in your office and lab space. Most of the fires that we've had drone related have occurred in our research labs rather than in the fields. One of the more recent one that we had is at UC Berkeley. For some reason, they were storing their matrice batteries next to a soldering iron, which, right, electrical engineers, they should have known this a whole lot better, right? But yeah, heating up right next to those batteries, all of a sudden it just bursts into flames, and yeah, fun times, fun times. But this brings up some other good points. Obviously, the breakdown of the electrolytic gel within our batteries can be caused by just about anything: overuse, underuse, extreme temperatures, humidity, or just aging. Your drone batteries are disposable, well, should be disposable, and they're not permanent features. Plan and budget for buying new batteries every 2 to 3 years. Don't think and invest all your money in your batteries at the start of your drone operations. Plan on having to resupply your batteries at some point. Once your batteries start to get puffy and swell up, toss them, get rid of them, because they're only just, they're ticking time bombs at that point. They will either just completely go out, or worse, they'll start a fire. Always keep your batteries in a safe location. Next slide. Not next slide. Okay. Well, always keep your batteries in a safe location. We're not talking, don't keep them in your temperature regulated garage. Keep them indoors, air conditioned room, in a good storage area. Keep them, near your computers, not near your computers, but in the same type of environment that you want to keep your good computers running in. Don't leave them in your sheds. Don't leave them in your garage. Don't leave them in your hot car. Right? If you've got a mission in the hot sun, don't leave them in a locked, closed car. Keep them cool, keep them in the shade, and they will last a lot longer. Bring fire extinguishers out to the field. Not only a fire extinguisher, I mentioned a shovel to help smother out fires earlier. One other thing that we found pretty useful is a fire blanket to help smother out larger fires, right? You just toss that blanket on and just kind of smash that fire out, cover it, smother it. As we found that to be a pretty economical solution for fires as well. But then, of course, once the fire begins and becomes out of control, well, at some point, you're just not going to be able to do anything about it. Make sure you always know who to call, your emergency contact information, the fire department, that they know that there is a fire that could potentially turn into a wildfire event. And also importantly, make sure that you know how to describe your position to emergency personnel. We had a fire at the UC Berkeley Richmond Field Station 5 years ago. The fire department is only like 2 blocks away from where that fire was, but it took nearly 10 minutes for them to figure out how to actually make it onto the field where the fire was. That 10-minute delay led to a much, much larger fire than it needed to have been. So not only is it important to know who to call, 911 or whatever emergency number that is nearby, but how to explain your position to where the fire may be or where you are. So think about nearest crossroads, access point, gate codes, things like that. Good thing to have those written down on a sheet of paper in case you need to repeat that to emergency personnel. All you have to do is just read down that sheet. Print it out, keep it with you, put it in a binder, and take it to the field with you. That's a good thing that you should never go to your fields alone. When you're doing your drone flying, always bring a friend. Always bring a friend. In regards to fire, what type of liability? Like all of it? It's like okay. If you are absolutely right, I mean, you're so liable for anything that happens. Now, in the state of California, it is not mandated that you have liability insurance. Maybe it should be, maybe it shouldn't be, who knows? But of course, right, I mean, you're liable just as much as you would be with any other piece of equipment. Mm-hmm. Oh, yes, then the university would be liable. The university would be liable if you're following the university's policy. So if you're within the UC system, if you're following the university's policy, then the university would be liable. If you're going against university policy, then you're liable. So that I may have described an incident earlier today. You know, the most expensive drone accident in the UC system was a drone graduate student flying a drone in his dorm room. It was still a fairly small drone, but he flew it up and it hit a fire sprinkler. And you know what happens when you hit a fire sprinkler? Where all that water goes? Yeah, it goes everywhere. There's no off switch for those. The entire tank empties. $130,000 worth of damage flooded his unit and 3 units below him. Guess who's paying for all that? Not the university. Yeah, his parents. So that's why there is no drone flying in all UC dorms. It is now in all of your dorm packets in the UC system. Do not fly drones in your dorm room. Yeah. He wasn't following the rules. Well, I mean, he was responsible and obviously he didn't have the money. So, you know, his parents chipped in. But yes, he was responsible. That's why you don't fly drones in dorm rooms. Okay, so crew resource management. Never go flying your drone alone. It is, again, you know, one of those recipes for disasters, because you never know when you might need an extra hand, someone to call 911 while you're dealing with the fire situation, to help wrangle cows. I did a lot of work in my vernal pool reserve, which is also half range land. And yes, those cows are very inquisitive. We've lost a decent amount of equipment to cows chewing on it. I can see Jacob nodding his head there. Jacob, how much equipment have you lost to the cows? Okay, so they're just moving his ground control points. But yeah, always good to bring a friend, but can't just bring a friend. You got to make sure that you train them to know how they can help you. So lots of things to do, lots of things that you could train your VO, visual observers or helpers to help you while you're out in the field. Make sure that you teach your visual observers or your helpers how to watch for intruding air traffic, how to watch for intruding ground hazards, yelling out car or truck, or dealing with people that might be walking into your flying site. Train your crew to look for abnormal drone behavior. Is a drone supposed to be doing that wobbly? Is it supposed to be making that noise? You should probably teach your crew how to look for those abnormal behaviors. Another fun one our ground visual observers do, prevent the pilot from being distracted by spectators. How many of you have been in the field and then all of a sudden someone stops by to say hi or to try to talk to you, try to do something? Yeah, perfect spot for your VO to step in and keep them away from you as the pilot so that you can maintain your operational performance. Sometimes you'll help the pilot navigating around obstacles. Did anyone do that exercise with Sean today? Were you doing navigation? No? Did we not get to it outside? Anyone flying with Eric Delusion? Okay. He didn't do teamwork exercises? No. That's too bad. Well, I printed off a list of exercises for them to try. Teamwork exercises was one of them. Maybe you didn't get to it, but that's okay. And then always train your flight crew to know what to do in an emergency situation. Let's look at a couple of these a little bit more in detail. Monitoring for air traffic is a little bit challenging. Now, most of the air traffic that you will see around you, it will not be an issue. Most general aviation is flying at around 10,000 feet AGL. Commercial airlines above 25,000, 30, 33,000, pretty more common. Your threats are going to be your helicopters, your crop dusters, survey aircraft, anything that's flying low. So where do you need to be looking for those intruding aircraft? At the horizon. So you're going to be listening. Most likely you're going to hear an aircraft long before you see it. So listen carefully. Have your team listen carefully. Don't play music in the background while you're flying. Don't have any extra, non-business talk while you're doing your operations. Everyone should be on focus, listening in particular for aircraft. Once you hear an aircraft, start scanning the horizon in the direction that you hear the aircraft, because any most important threat is going to be just above the horizon, just above the tree line. And it's going to be real difficult to spot, but it's the most critical to spot. Best thing to do, scan, left to right. You can use your hand as a pointer, use your hand, your hat or whatnot, scan back and forth methodically. If you're just trying to look around, you'll never find it. Scan methodically, slowly, going back and forth. Each pass should take around 2 to 5 seconds. Keeping a real close eye, looking for anything on the horizon that might look like a little speck. Maybe that speck is getting a little bit bigger. Who knows? But keep an eye out for that. If you see an aircraft and it's above you, or you have to look out for it, it's either way too late for you to respond, or it's not going to be a threat. The most important things for you to look at are for the aircraft just on the horizon. Once you see your aircraft, you'll need to assess the threat. You'll have to judge by the distance, the altitude, and the heading. A little bit more difficult than you might imagine it to be. An aircraft that is flying right at your direction is the hardest to spot, because looking at it head on, it is going to look like a little spot that's just slightly getting bigger. You will not be able to tell how fast it's moving when it's coming directly at you. So if you see a spot in the sky and it's not moving, you should be worried. If you see a spot in the sky and it's darting to the left or to the right, that's good. That means it's moving away from you. But if it's just hovering right there, there's a good chance that it might be coming right at you. That's something to really pay attention to. But of course, staring at the sky is actually kind of difficult. Physiological phenomenon called the empty field myopia. It is the term of when you keep staring at nothing, your eyes go out of focus. And if you keep staring at a blank blue sky, your eyes will go out of focus real easily. Make sure to occasionally look down at something that you could actually see before going back to your scanning the sky. So take the time, do a quick scan, then go ahead and look at something else, something that's, somewhat distant. Make sure that your eyes are remaining active and focused, and then go back to scanning. Your flight crew is only as good as they know what to do. Really make sure that you talk with your flight crew before you start any flight activity. Tell them what's happening. Tell them what's going on. Tell them what they need to be looking for. Good flight crew briefing. Explain what their role is, what their responsibilities are, especially what abnormal conditions to look for, and your emergency procedures. If our batteries catch on fire, what do we do? Where are the fire extinguishers? Where are the emergency contact informations? How do we explain our location to emergency personnel? If I, the pilot, becomes incapacitated, maybe it's not that I've had a medical emergency. What if I just trip and fall over? What do we do then? Should We do medical something or others. Do we pick up the controller? Do we pause the flight? Do we let the flight keep going? Do we call 911? Right? We should discuss these kind of scenarios before they happen. Now, luckily for the most part, you know, they're not too crazy or out of the ordinary, but something to make sure that everyone is on the same page before you start flying. And speaking of being on the same page, make sure that your in-flight communication language is known. What words are we going to use for the drone versus the plane, the aircraft? Do we call it by its nickname? Are we going to get confused by what we're referring to? Are we going to give commands in north, east, south, cardinal directions? Or are we going to say left and right, down the road, head to the tower? Let's make sure that our communication language is the same, that we know what we're talking about. A good strategy, establish a common playbook or phraseology. Maybe some common phrases to use, right? All clears, proceed, possible aircraft heard, right? Just kind of standard language that if we say this phrase, this is what we mean. We don't want to get caught in a communication snafu. Emergency management always starts with planning. Always plan to solve the most common scenarios. Don't make your plans super complicated because you won't have time to consult a manual while it's happening. Here are some common scenarios to make sure that you plan for. What happens if someone walks into your flight area? What happens if you need to land immediately? What happens if your drone flies away? If your drone loses telemetry, the wind changes, we crash into a tree. What happens if we start a fire, right? What to do in all these scenarios, something you should have planned out and something you should explain with your flight crew before you start flying. And especially that number 9 there, pilot incapacitation. It's one of those things that, I mean, it doesn't happen like a medical emergency very often, but we've had a lot of people trip and fall while they fly drones. It's one of those silly things that, right? But you gotta have some sort of plan in action for. And one thing that always comes to mind is never leave your pilot by themselves because they're just gonna walk into a gopher hole real easily. There we go. You know, learn from the mistakes of others because you won't have enough time to make them all yourself. We'll finish off today. We'll finish off today with a couple of statements on our airspace management. That's a big risky thing here. So as you know, under Part 107, you need FAA authorization to fly in most of our controlled airspaces, Class B, C, D, and Surface Class E associated with an airport. So not all Surface Class E, just those associated with an airport. We have a nice little map there. If you want approval, you either go through the LANCE method. This is something you can apply for through Drone Deploy, through AirMap. Used to be able to do it through Skyward, but they just closed down. Another one that I like is AIRSPACE Link and UAS Sidekick. UAS Sidekick is $5 a month, but AIRSPACE Link is free. It actually works out pretty well as well. But if LANCE is not available, you still have another option through the Drone Zone Airspace Authorization, which is the old paper COA process, which you now file through Drone Zone. There used to be a process called the 107.41 waiver system, but they stopped utilizing that one once LANCE became on board. How do we find that information? That's where we go to our UAS facility maps. Just type in Google up facility maps. I think my link got cut off there. Green squares on our facility maps means LANCE enabled. Red squares means LANCE not enabled. You can see it pretty easily. These days, most of our airports in California are LANC enabled. There's a couple that are still not. Those are typically military towers that are not LANC enabled. So I think Miramar and San Diego is still not LANC enabled. What's another one? What's the base over by 5 Points in the central? All right, there's an ANR site that we fly at all the time. I'm blanking on the name. Lemoore, yeah. Lemoore is not LANC enabled. You got to file a drone zone COA. Inside of each of our squares is the approved altitude for most drone flying. If you're a recreational pilot, that's the maximum flight altitude you could fly at. If you're a 1 of 7 pilot, you could ask for approval to fly above it. The airport altitude is set by the airport itself. So that's 400 square was designated by the airport, not the FAA. So if you have any concerns about why they chose a particular altitude, it's the airport tower manager who came up with the altitudes, not some bureaucrat in DC. There's 2 approval processes through LANC. You have the automatic and the manual. If your flight altitude is below the listed ceiling altitude, you will be granted automatic approval. So if we were to travel about a mile south of here into the Class C airspace of Monterey, we're at the 400 grid, you could get approval instantaneously. But if we were to go a little bit further south into a 200 grid, and we wanted to fly at 300 feet, getting approval to fly above the listed altitude, we have to go through the manual process. This manual process goes through the airport tower itself. The tower needs to approve it, and that can take some time. You have to approve it, or they have to submit it at least 48 hours ahead of time, preferably longer, because it will automatically get canceled 24 hours prior to your flight unless it's been approved. So they'll let you know 24 hours ahead of time if your flight has been denied. How to file a LANC request? AirMap, you can do that on iOS and Android and the web. Skyward went out of business about a month ago. Kitty Hawk is now called Aloft. You can do that through Aloft. UAS Sidekick is $5 a month. Works pretty well though. iOS and Android. And there should be some more LANC providers by this fall, but who knows how that's going to play out. I know that I've got so much to talk about here. But again, the manual approval process, you submit to the tower will either approve or deny, or the FAA will deny it if the airport ignores it or doesn't have time to get to it. LANC is pretty good, but it's not perfect. You can try to call the tower to get approvals, but the FAA has issued guidance to all the towers not to grant any airport approval without going through LANC. And there's not quite a way to mechanism for arguing or requesting a hearing on some of these ceilings. Some of these ceilings might be a little bit arbitrary, unfortunately. For example, this is UC Irvine. We've got really tall buildings, like 150 feet tall at UC Irvine, and it's a 0-foot grid. And we're not allowed to fly without getting special approval. And of course, the airport tower is too busy to approve any manual authorizations there. We run into a lot of problems with them. The other mechanism, if it's a non-LANC enabled airspace, is to go through drone zone. You have to give them some information. It's just an old paper process. There's 2 options, a wide area authorization or a specific site authorization. Wide area means you're just going to fly underneath the FAA facility map altitudes. The site specific would be if you need to fly at a specific location above the ceiling. There's a whole lot of information here. I'm going to skip ahead because we're already past 5 o'clock. Man, time flies. It really does. There we go. Here's our breakdown here. Green squares for Lance on the facility map, red squares for drone zone. Below the ceiling is automatic. Above the ceiling, yes, you'll have to, hope for the best for the airport tower, either approved, denied, or denied by the FAA. If you're operating on a red square, you can get below the ceiling wide area authorization, and you just say a generic safety case for your approval. But if you need a specific site, you'll have to give them a specific safety case on why your drone authorization will be safe at that area. Can you call the tower and ask? You can call, but the tower is not obligated to give you an answer. They've been instructed by the FAA to not do anything over the phone anymore. Does that mean that you're completely out of luck? Not entirely. If you passed your 107 exam, you might have heard about the charts supplement, where you can look up more information about the airports themselves. Now this will tell you a little bit more detail. Here's Imperial Beach. Lots of zero grids along that beach. Means no drone access? Not quite. See, if we look up the Imperial Beach directory, we find out that the airport actually closes on the weekends, and that airspace reverts to Class G. So as long as we were only flying on the weekends, we could be operating in Class G airspace. Class D during the week, Class G on the weekends. Now, of course, I'm sure there's people at the beach, so that might be another issue to worry about, but at least the airspace would be Class G on the weekends and other federal holidays as well. So if you find yourself needing an airspace, you might want to check the chart supplement. You might find yourself with an opportunity on a tower closure. Ooh, temporary flight restrictions, another fun one. Lots of different types of temporary flight restrictions. If you need to fly in a TFR, you need to get approval through the TFR granting entity. Lots of different options there. Sometimes we have disaster and hazard areas. You have to go through the incident commander. On demonstrations and major sporting events, those are the Olympics, All-Star Games, and aerial demonstrations. There's a process for that one. Proximity to the president and other parties, good luck. You're not going to get that. Vice President Kamala Harris will be in San Francisco, actually later this week. And so we're having to shut down all of our San Francisco drone operations for the construction site, because you'll be in town there. And then we have the SSI TFRs, Disneyland, MLB, NFL games, and our military installations as well. So lots of fun stuff there. If you need more information there, but I think Sean wants to invite everyone to go see more autonomous flying. Is that right, Sean? You're going to start bringing people out to do an autonomous flight? Mm-hmm. Sounds good. Yep, perfect timing. Perfect timing. That's it. Obviously, there's a whole lot more information. Feel free to come up and ask me questions. I'll be around for the rest of the week. But this is my last presentation, so I'm excited about that one.
All right, thank you to everyone on Zoom. This group is going outside to look at an autonomous flight. I don't think we could, maybe we can pull it up on a tablet, huh? If you're interested, stay on. I'm going to attempt to put Zoom on a tablet so you can see what's going on outside. It may or may not be useful, but we'll give it a shot.